In seminary, you're asked to declare a major. At Vanderbilt, we could major in church history, preaching and worship, ethics, Bible studies, or counseling. And you had to get several hours in all 5 areas to graduate over your 3 years in seminary, but you had to specialize in one of those. I was serving a county seat church in southern Kentucky while I was in grad school. And I found out very quickly in that church that I already knew more about the Bible and liturgy than anybody in the church wanted to know. But the one area where I was consistently being made to feel entirely inadequate was in counseling, so I changed my major. I was just 22 years old, and I had emerged from what I think now must have been the most naive, milquetoast, puritanical family in the whole world. But I was daily sitting in the office in that church talking to senior adults who had been raped when they were children, who struggled with addictions to drugs and alcohol and pornography, and a couple to shopping. Visiting in parishioners' homes, I discovered that several of my folks were obsessive hoarders, and others were hiding domestic violence, and a couple were hiding serious criminal behavior. So I went to Vanderbilt to get a PhD in New Testament, but ended up getting a master's and doctorate in counseling because I was trying to become prepared to actually help my congregation to deal with the challenges that they faced every day in their lives. One of the most important accidents of my early ministry was when I offered to take a very active alcoholic in the church to an AA meeting. He liked coming to see me. He enjoyed the attention of his weekly appointments with me, but I was not helping him. And so I recognized that now that his family had disowned him, his boss had fired him, and his health was crumbling, that if he didn't get help, he was going to die pretty quickly. And having a young companion seemed to make it okay for him to go to AA meetings, and we went every Tuesday and Thursday night to the little Methodist church at the edge of Russellville, Kentucky, and went down into the church basement to the AA meeting. In the course of the evening, you start out greeting everyone, and everybody smoked, and the smoke would fill up the room so that by the end of the evening, you couldn't even see the people on the other side of the folding table, but you could hear their stories. And what I heard in those meetings was the very certain claim that alcoholism is not a moral failing. It is a disease. But unlike other diseases, there was no surgery. There was no medication. AA insisted that the disease only had a spiritual cure. Only God could save them. Now, naming addiction as a disease relieves the addict of the guilt that everyone else was eager to heap up on them. Regardless of the condemnation of parents, the anger of spouses and children, the various casualties of lost jobs and broken relationships and car wrecks and brief incarcerations, it ultimately wasn't their fault. It was the disease. And I believe they were sincere. I really do. I believe they were sincere in what they said about turning their lives over to God as they understood God, their higher power. But all of the conversations revolved around not what God did, but what they did to gain sobriety and to maintain it. They talked about stinking thinking that could lead them down the path of drinking again. They talked about the dubious luxury of anger, the necessity of letting go of resentment, of embracing forgiveness, of accepting that other people had messed up and did things wrong, but you didn't have to let those thoughts, those memories, occupy all of the vacant space inside of your skull. Now, my doctoral project was on monastic spirituality, and And so I spent a lot of time in Trappist monasteries and wading my way through classical spiritual literature, but I was still going to AA meetings 2 or 3 times a week with various recovering addicts. And what I discovered that was surprising, that in the literature of the ancient monastic sources that I was studying, St. Bernard of Clairvaux, the Rule of St. Benedict, the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, the sayings of the Desert Fathers, even in the Imitatio Christi, sure, the ancient writings were written by monks, and so they sounded monkish, and the AA literature was written by old drunks, but the old drunks were a lot easier to understand, and they were saying a lot of the same things. The Desert Fathers would say, a man is unacceptable to God even if he raises the dead, if he is yet angry. In an AA meeting, you'll hear, if you stay mad at your ex-wife, if you keep wallowing in why your mother didn't love you, then you're never going to get sober, even if you quit drinking. Because there is such a thing as being a dry drunk, of having no more alcohol in your system and still being just as much of a jerk as you were when you were drinking. You can get off the booze, but if you still act mean and crazy, sobriety hasn't done much for you. Both my ancient monks and my friends at the AA folding table talked a lot about God, but everything they said was about how their faith impacted them, how they were compelled to get their thinking straight, to take control of their appetites. There is no cure for alcoholism that does not rest on the alcoholic's decision that they are not going to drink. And alcoholics will consistently eschew the claim, I'm never going to drink again. No one ever says that. They'll say, I'm not going to drink today. And on a bad day, you might say, I'm not going to drink this morning. On a really bad day, you say, I'm not going to drink this hour or this minute. You divide it up. But it always comes back to rest on, I'm making a powerful decision that I am no longer going to poison my present with my anger and resentment and hurt from the past, which becomes a drink. Jung even said the reason we call alcohol spirits is because it's ultimately a spiritual illness, that somehow you're looking for spiritual healing inside a bottle. But in AA, they find strength in community, a community that is united by one thing, which is the desire to be sober. They often have a sponsor, person that, you say you're giving all your problems to God, but God doesn't answer God's phone. You have a sponsor that you call when you feel like you're getting weak. And I know lots of people that have a sponsor, but they are also sponsored to 2 or 3 other people, because it's the community network that makes the addiction stay at bay. People help each other to reach their goal that they call sobriety, but I think the rest of us would simply call it sanity, that you're not regaining your sobriety always, but you are regaining your sanity, specifically your health. Now, I've known a lot of people in the program who would say that they were actually thankful that they were alcoholics, because their alcoholism is what led them to the spiritual awakening that they discovered in AA, the insight. And I have to tell you, I grew up in the church, always was in church, was a pastor at a very young age, but the spirituality of AA really impacted me because it's life or death spirituality. You're either going to get your act together spiritually, or you're going to be dead soon. And the guy that I first went with to those meetings decided that drinking was better than going to those meetings all the time. And he did die. He died of starvation in a little mobile home. He just drank and didn't eat and died alone. And it was days later that the body was found, because he had broken every relationship that he ever had. Now, this time of year, very arbitrary holiday that we have in the middle of winter where we turn our calendar over to a new year, many people will take the symbolic change of numbers to make personal resolutions about how they are going to live differently in the coming year than they did in the last year. It's no accident if you notice that all the TV commercials now are for diet programs and exercise programs, that the most frequently made resolution is, I'm going to lose some weight this year. And as important as that can be for those of us that are carrying an extra baby or two on a daily basis, that's pure vanity compared to the larger issue of getting rid of the stinking thinking, of becoming sane again, of being healthy. The Romans had a two-faced god. Greeks didn't imitate this one, but the Romans had a god named Janus, from whom we get the name for the first month of the year, January. But Janus was portrayed oftentimes as a doorway, so that one face was always looking in the direction that you came from, and the other face was looking towards where you were going. As with our history of monastic saints and our friends in 12-step recovery programs, the talk about God is really expressing an awareness of the vitality of the choices that we're making, the power of the decisions that we make. One of my most perplexing early counseling clients, a wonderful, intelligent woman from rural Kentucky that had an abortion back in 1930 from a terrible incest situation. And she was regularly a patient at the mental hospital in Louisville, and I would go up there and visit her, and her psychiatrist would say to her, Evelyn, you're this close to being healthy. You're one decision away from being healthy. You are one vital choice. And she would just cry and say, I don't know how to make that choice. But I know that what the psychiatrist was saying is, at some point, you have to stop letting the horrible things that happen to you continue to poison today and the next day and the next. The poem I wrote about Janus for our wisdom lesson today, what I wanted to say is the obvious truth is that door is never locked. The past can always come into our future to poison us. The stinking thinking that can lead an alcoholic back to the bottle is the same as the resentment that keeps us throwing another log on the fire of our depression, throw another log on the fire of our anger, our rage over past hurts, our disappointments and betrayals. Thomas Merton said that of all the renunciations, and Trappist monks make lots of renunciations, starting with personal property, sex, and individual freedom. They make a lot of renunciations. But he said the most important and the most difficult is the renunciation of resentment, that you cannot make spiritual progress carrying your resentments with you. The question that I would like to pose to you today is not just what you plan to resolve to do in 2018, but rather how much of 2017 and 2016 do you feel obligated to drag along with you into 2018? That year when you got fired, the year when your spouse cheated on you, that year when you ran out of money and you had to quit college. How much of that are you going to carry through the door into 2018? Now, most addictions are rooted in self-medication. It's an illness, all right, oftentimes an illness that is an illness of having too good of a rememberer. People medicate themselves with alcohol, with heroin, with meth, but also with TV and with the internet and with Facebook and with gambling in order to silence their memories. Why people go to casinos and sit in front of a slot machine for hours without moving? They'll forget to go to the bathroom. They just sit there mesmerized. Psychologically, it isn't so much the thrill of the unknown outcome, because you know what the outcome's going to be. You sit there long enough, the outcome is the same. All your money is now their money. But they create an environment in which people experience what we call a present moment. Most of the time, gambling is not your sincere hope that you're going to make money, but it focuses you in a present moment. Almost all of our lives, we're either thinking about what has happened to us or we're filled with anxiety about what's coming in the future. But gambling forces you to let go of the past and not think about the future. You're in that second. That's the way almost every addiction works. When your kids are playing video games for hours, they have, during that time, given up their anxieties. They've given up their sense of powerlessness, their fear of failure, and they are in a moment. Getting high does that. Getting drunk does that. And here's the real kicker for church folk. Church services can do that. Meditation, prayer can do that. When I was much more involved in counseling practice than I am now and ever want to be again, I once asked a psychology professor why it is that almost every borderline personality disorder that I encountered was the child of an active alcoholic. But when they weren't, when I had a borderline in my office who didn't have an alcoholic parent, they always had a severely fundamentalist religious fanatic as a parent. And this psychologist said to me, well, what's the difference? Both alcoholism and fundamentalist religion are denials of reality, and they make the individual emotionally unavailable. So it has the same effect on a child. Casinos are carefully designed to remove you from the real world. There are no windows, there are no clocks, it's usually a little cooler than might be considered comfortable, and the slot machines are very loud and very repetitive, almost hypnotic. I would point out that megachurches are built with no windows and no clocks. They're almost always a little cooler than might be comfortable, and the music is very loud and repetitive. So that both experiences give you an experience of being in the present moment while you are being robbed of all your money. Not that that's any of my business. Whether it's drugs or alcohol or gambling or religion or even obsessively playing video games, scrolling through Facebook, locking into your favorite polemic and hysterical news station, wouldn't it be healthier to just let go of the past rather than trying to drown out all the noise? I'm not saying that you haven't been hurt. I have been. You have been. I'm not saying that you need to get amnesia, but honestly, how much space do you want to reserve inside your skull for all that stuff? I think that one of the most powerful images in the metaphor of the resurrection of Jesus, as is told in the traditional Gospels, is that when he was raised from the dead, he still had wounds in his hands, in his feet, in his side. He didn't stay dead, but the crucifixion was still real. I never tell people to deny their pain. Your memory of your past may be exaggerated. You may alter it. We all do. We're all the hero of our own narratives, of course. But I feel you. Whether you remember it accurately or whether you've terribly exaggerated it, I know it was real. I know it was bad. But aren't you glad it's over? Or it can be over, could be over, if you're willing to let it be over. So far as we know, the only reason that shock therapy works is that repeated electroshocks will cause short-term memory loss, literally giving the mental patient a chance to think again without being locked into a cloud of obsessive remembering. Now, in a few minutes, you're going to be invited to come up here for communion, and I'd like to invite you to just imagine all of that hurt and resentment and the people that you can't help but hate just a little bit. If you could imagine them all being packaged up in a duffel bag, and you stand up and just leave that behind you when you come up to the table. Just turn the doorknob and walk through the doorway and leave that stuff behind and never go back to it. Now, a lot of you are going to go out tonight on New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve is famous for amateur drinkers giving themselves something to deeply regret in the new year. Be careful, but do celebrate the end of a long and challenging year. Yeah, like I said, 2017 can just go straight to hell. But let's not let 2018 be defined by the demons that follow us. As they say in AA, don't think about how sick you've been, think about how well you want to be.
Amen. Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.